Man, in this crazy economy, how do you know when to like rent and hold it or when to sell your home? Because this guy right over here, I'm definitely selling that. And I crunched the numbers on this guy and 100% I'm gonna rent it. The one across the street, however, definitely gonna dump that one. If you don't know the math behind when to rent or when to sell, you're gonna wanna watch today's video. Check it out.
One shot, now the future is yours. Go! I'm turning dreams into reality. Yeah, it's one shot, now the future is yours. Go!
If I rent, there could be trouble. If I sell, there could be double. Man, so many people want to know, Kris, I've got my property, I'm definitely upgrading or I'm buying a different house. Should I be like holding onto my home and renting it out and buying another one? Like I heard that you did that on your channel when you got started. Should I just sell and cash out because man, the property has gone up in value and like go buy like a nice car and a nice house? Listen, today I'm gonna break it all down. Before we dive into this, here's something that I want you to consider. Are you aware that your house is likely the most meaningful financial asset that you'll ever hold? I mean that when you actually get to retirement, you evaluate how much money you've saved for retirement, whether it was in a pension, a 401k, or an IRA, most of the time, statistically, if you compare that to how much money you've made in holding your home in equity, like it's gone up in value, the equity far outshines whatever you spent saving your entire life for retirement. So this is a really important question on whether or not you should actually hold on to the property while buying a new one or actually just cash out and sell it. Just by virtue of owning a piece of property with time, it does appreciate and it goes up in value. And you know, a lot of people at retirement say, wow, I had no idea that my house would have gone up $200,000 in the time period that I held it. And they start doing the math and thinking, if I had just had not one, but 4 more houses, technically I would be a millionaire just by virtue of my real estate alone. It's kind of a cool thought, and it's definitely going to factor into today's conversation about this. How do you really decide whether you're going to rent or whether you're going to sell your property? Figuring out what to do with your current home may not be as simple as listing it. Depending on your financial situation and your local housing market, you may be better off renting it out rather than selling it, or vice versa. Today, I'm going to do a deep dive and I'm going to share 5 different ways of looking at this difficult question of whether to sell or rent. To help you arrive at the correct answer and really understand all your options, there are 5 specific criteria that we're going to be evaluating right now so that you can make the right choice. So let's take a look at number 1. You got to take a look at the home's equity. As in when you bought this house, has it actually appreciated? Because the difference between what you owe and what it's worth, that gap is called equity. And the more equity you have, the more cash you might get when selling the property. If your ability to buy a new house relies on accessing equity currently tied up in your home, then selling it or doing a home equity line of credit may be one of your best options. As in, think about it this way. You have this house and you're thinking, we want to buy a new house, but it's more expensive. So we need to get the equity or the money we've earned out of it by selling it somehow so that we can put it in the new house and still keep our mortgage payment a little bit lower. Selling it might be a way of doing that, but you could also keep the property and do a HELOC, or what's called a home equity line of credit, where you basically say, bank, I'd like to keep it, but I need to access some of that equity back out of it so that I can also put it towards the new home. Let me give you a common scenario that a lot of people find themselves in. You might actually have a house, and let's say that currently it's valued at $350,000. But that's only because it's gone up in value. You actually bought it maybe a couple years earlier. Maybe you bought it for $200,000. So what you owe on this property is $200,000. And you're sitting here thinking, Kris, the difference between the value and what I owe, $350,000 minus $200,000, that's $150,000 of equity. And we're looking at actually getting a new home, and we'd like something nicer. We're actually planning now on not going back to work at a commercial space. We're going to work from home. So Kris, we need a different house. We need a home that's going to take care of our family situation, but also a place that we can comfortably work from, where the kids aren't bothering me, or I've got a dedicated workspace, or whatever it is that you need. So you're thinking, hey, this is my existing house, but on the new house, let's take a look at it. Let's just say that it has a value of $500,000. And normally you wouldn't be able to afford a $500,000 house, But you're thinking, if I can get this $150,000 out of it, maybe by selling it, then my down payment could take my $500,000 down to $350,000 on what I'm gonna owe. And sure, my payment will be higher at $350,000 rather than the $200,000, but the house is going to be so much bigger, it's gonna be so much nicer. So Kris, in that situation with the equity that I have in my existing home, like, should I try to hold on to the first one and do a home equity line of credit? Or should I actually sell it to get the full 150 grand out and put it towards the new home? Well, I think we've explained the first option really well. You could literally sell this property, get roughly $150,000 out minus closing costs, and you could apply it towards a new home. There's another option though. You could actually keep this home and do what's called a home equity line of credit. That's where you go to the bank and say, bank, I owe $200,000 on a house that's worth $350,000. Most banks today will give you 80 to 90% of that equity back out. Let's just say with like Key West Bank, you went up to 90%. What's 90% of $350,000? It's about $315,000. It means that you wouldn't be able to access $150,000 as in selling it, but it does mean that you might be able to access $115,000. And then you start really doing the math and saying, well, Kris, after closing costs and selling costs, paying realtors, I might only net $115,000 anyway. Would it be worthwhile for me to hold on to this home and just use a home equity line to hold on to it and then buy the new house? Well, at least you now know you've got two considerations. When I share the next criteria, I think it's going to get even clearer for you. The second criteria for you to consider is the market value, as in what's actually happening to the market right now. Every market is different, but on average, real estate always appreciates. And that basically means that over time, it does go up in value. Like I could throw up a graph and show you that over the last 65 years, on average, nationwide, every house goes up just shy of 5% in value. So I put in the value of my home, let's say it's $350,000, and then I'm gonna multiply that by 0.05. That means that I'm assuming that the 65-year average on appreciation will hold true. That's $17,500. And for just a moment, imagine that you were going to hold this home for 5 years. If I just multiply that by 5, that shows me that number is just nearing right around $90,000. That's what appreciation is. Well, if you expect that your current home's value will increase within a few years or less, you might actually want to consider renting it out and then selling it later so that you can take advantage of that appreciation. I guess it comes down to your belief. Do you believe that this market is going to keep going up, or do you think there's a looming bubble waiting to burst? But Kris, what do you think will actually happen with the market? Does it go up or does it go down? Hans, that's a really good question. Let's think about it. Rates are at a 50-year all-time low. We have a demand, according to the Wall Street Journal, for 4 million missing homes that need to be built. And the question is, can the current number of builders in this country actually bust out 4 million missing homes in 5 years? I don't think so. And I further don't think that a bubble can actually burst as long as we haven't actually met that demand. So I think prices are going to continue increasing. Yeah, and not a little, a lot, Hans. Don't get too excited, Hans. Don't forget, pigs get fat, but hogs get slaughtered. Speaking of which, let's talk about capital gains. This is most certainly a third consideration when deciding whether you should actually rent the home by keeping it or maybe actually consider selling it. First of all, what is a capital gains? Well, capital gains is what happens when you buy an asset and over time it goes up in value. Once you've held it for longer than a year, it becomes long-term capital gains. And you may not have known this, but the government, at least in America, is like a secret silent partner, which means that when you make money on investments that you hold long-term, guess what? They want a piece of the action. And they have a special name for that tax. It's called a capital gains tax. Psst, by the way, did you know that Biden is trying to double capital gains tax? Listen, here's the bottom line with capital gains. If you're thinking of selling your home instead of renting it out, you'll be able to exclude up to $250,000 of capital gains from the sale, or even up to $500,000 if you're filing as a married couple from your income if the home was your primary residence for 2 out of the last 5 years. In other words, if you lived in this baby for 2 out of the last 5 years, then you can actually write off quite a bit of money, up to either $250,000 filing single or $500,000 if you're filing jointly. Hold the phone, Kris. Help me understand this capital gains thing. Do you remember the previous example? We talked about a house that you owed $200,000 on. It's gone up to $350,000. It had $150,000 worth of equity. If you decided that your best option was to sell that home, and let's say you receive $150,000 of gains as a proceed at that point of sale, you're not gonna have to pay any tax on that. Why? Because if you've lived in it for 2 of the last 5 years, that $150,000 is below the $250,000 exemption. You're not gonna owe any capital gains tax on it. Criteria number 4, passive income. You might have been thinking for quite some time, you know what? I've got my job income, I've got my house, but I've been actually subscribed to Kris Krohn's channel, and I see that every time that dude buys another house, his passive income goes up because his money's working for him. He basically buys a house, he rents it out, and let's say his mortgage is $2,000 a month, but the people pay $3,000 a month. There's $1,000 leftover dollars a month. That's called passive income. This could be the perfect time for you to actually get in the game of real estate, starting a business, or doing something different. If you're interested in long-term passive income instead of just a one-time lump sum of capital, consider keeping the home, renting it out. And as long as you're able to effectively manage the property, you'll acquire more money in the long run. In fact, in a few minutes, I'm gonna open up a calculator and I'm gonna run the exact math on an example. You can go to the same website, do it yourself, and we're actually gonna look at how much money would you make renting it versus just selling. Now, before we run that math, I wanna talk about the 5th and final criteria of whether or not you might be underwater. Honestly, it's highly unlikely, but underwater is a term that's used when you owe more than the house is actually worth. Check it out. You may not be able to afford to sell your house because you're underwater on your mortgage, meaning your loan balance is greater than the home's current market value. In this case, turning your home into a rental property may provide the opportunity to gain some equity before selling it in the future. Well, Kris, you've given me a lot to consider, but does it really answer my question on whether I should rent or sell? Well, if it's not clear at this point, we're actually going to do the math. There's a calculator that we're going to go to right now, and I'm going to show you how to do this yourself. The National Association of Residential Property Managers, or in other words, the NARPM.org, they've got this calculator that you can go and actually use yourself. But I've plugged in some of the information from the example that I gave you earlier because I want you to actually see the financial difference of holding on to it and renting versus actually selling. In this example, we now have a home that is worth $350,000. And the price that was paid for it originally when you did get it was $250,000. This was a house where you put down probably like a 3.5% down payment. So your actual mortgage at the time of purchase was $235,000. Well, that was a few years ago. And as you've been making your payments, you've been paying it down. And currently the mortgage balance is $200,000. Now from here, check this out. Let's assume that you have an interest rate of 4% on this property. And let's also assume that your mortgage payment is $1,122. I'm going to say that between this and the next house that we're buying, that there's no mortgage difference if you're just pushing it forward. We're not going to worry about taxes. But let's assume that we can rent out this property for $1,600 a month. And even though appreciation is normally 4.68%, let's assume that based on all the market conditions we've been looking at, that we're actually looking at 10%, and that you plan on renting it for 5 years by the time you sell it. The big question is, what was a smarter choice? Was it better to actually rent it or was it better to sell it? Well, check this out. The automatic math that says here that if you rent out your property, you'll have $97,000 more wealth in 5 years versus actually just selling it. And you know what this really means? This really means that this is why investors win. This is why wealthy people hold real estate. This is factoring in a lot of the benefits of why people try to hold on to property as they acquire more. Think about it for just a second. When one property goes up 10% in value, you feel like a stud, you feel like a winner. But when you have 5 properties going up in value, or like me, hundreds of properties, guess what? I'm now making millions of dollars as the market just flinches. Now check it out. $97,000 on a 5-year rental might sound exciting, but I'm going to see if I can tempt you with something that I think is way more exciting. Check it out. Here's your home that you sold, and when you sold it, you got $150,000. Imagine for a moment that you put $100,000 towards a new property, and this is going to be your home, but there's $50,000 left over. Did you know I can show you how to buy a piece of real estate entry level in a market, and every 5 years sell it and exchange 1 for 2, and 5 years later trade 2 for 4, and then 4 for 8? Well, over a 20-year period of time, this $50,000 has the possibility of growing into $4.3 million. And you gotta be thinking, Kris, how can a $50,000 investment in real estate over 20 years turn into $4.3 million? Well, that's because when I buy real estate, my standard, there has to be a minimum 25% ROI, or a return on investment. This is why I became financially free by the age of 26, and I've helped other people become multimillionaires, frankly, doing the exact same thing. You see, a lot of people are just thinking about increasing their lifestyle. They're thinking about a nicer home. They're not really thinking about their financial future. But what if I told you that delaying just a little bit of gratification could open up the doors to massive wealth down the road, a retirement that you wanted, and frankly, living more a life that matched your dreams that are inside? Well, if one house can become $4 million, what do you think the $150,000 could do? That could turn into over potentially $13 million. And if that sounds exciting to you, you definitely need to click the link below and get a free game plan. See, a member of my team will sit down with you and basically say, all right, you've got options. Should you rent? Should you sell? Should you buy? Should you build? Your life is probably a lot more complicated than what we've been talking about here. And if you want to know what I would actually do, I've trained people on my team to give you an exact game plan of precisely what I would do if I woke up today in your financial shoes. And that might actually include partnering with me and taking some of this money and leveraging my billion-dollar track record on 5,000 homes and showing you how to make this kind of money to create an entirely new financial future. If that sounds good to you, definitely click the link below. Let's get you some options and see if it improves your perspective, or at least gives you some other ideas to be thinking about. Hey, thanks for watching today. If you're not a subscriber, fix that right now. I'm dropping videos all the time to help awaken your financial genius. And if you are a little bit curious what it might look like to partner directly with me, no matter where you live in the world, and literally be fully passive as I leverage my turnkey system of 200 experts, I recently had someone find me on YouTube and wonder just how fast they could go. And in this video right over here, you get to watch Ryan and his wife go on a crazy journey of buying several homes in their first 6 months that changed everything for them. Do I fantasize what would happen if those bolts just ripped out because I weigh 250 pounds? A little bit. Is that helpful? Not in particular. Am I happy the faster I go down? Yes.